one of the things that a lot of people are suffering from in our times, men and women, is low self-esteem. Right? So you have a very low opinion of yourself. And so when you do find someone who's even remotely interested in you, all of a sudden your world becomes meaningful again because somebody sees worth in you. And this goes back to his self-worth point, right? And so a lot of people are really gung-ho about getting married to this girl or this guy because it was the first one who came along, and they're like, well, you know, lightning don't strike twice. I mean, I know what I look like in the mirror, and this person has bad enough of an eyesight to go with this. So, you know, I know, seriously. But they have, it's going on inside the head, that, you know, yeah, for a lot of people. But the idea that, you know, nobody else is ever going to come along, you know, I have this chance, even though this is not the perfect kind of person for me, but I should settle. On the one hand, we don't look for someone perfect, but on the other hand, you shouldn't be settling also. And especially as a result of a low opinion of yourself, you shouldn't be doing that. That once you fall in love, apparently, or you are obsessed enough, you're infatuated enough, then logic and common sense and reason and rationality goes out the window. So it doesn't matter how much somebody tries to talk sense into you. Once you've been like infatuated enough, you're a mule. You're no good. So if you can come back to humanity a little bit and detox from your obsession, then this conversation actually makes sense. Because if you've gone far enough down the road, you're too emotionally invested to even think about this stuff. Right? So you have to decide where you are. And for just a little additional comment to the, you know, thinking that you're going to change someone once you get married. Well, your parents, who love you more than anyone who will ever love you, can't change you about this issue. Because you want to marry someone and you're not listening to them, and you're not listening to the fact that you're 16 years old, or that you're, you know, you don't have a job, and, you know, any of it. You don't want to hear any of it. And you say they're not perfect, but I can change them. Well, the ones who love you so much and raised you up, they can't change you. How are you going to change anybody else that you don't even know? It doesn't even make any sense.
Infatuation equals love, or not being able to distinguish between infatuation and love. Infatuation is the initial feelings of lust and attraction and those butterflies in your stomach, which most people tend to confuse for love. They tend to think that that initial feeling when you look at someone and your eyes meet someone and you feel butterflies in your stomach, and in your head there's like a Bollywood movie going off in the background, and you're in the field somewhere running through or something like that. That is what most people tend to think. They think that is love. And yeah, it's kind of weird. It's a little bit weird. But that is actually infatuation. Those are the initial feelings that you have towards someone. Love, on the other hand, is something that takes time. So as we know, when a couple, when they get married, of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts love and mercy in their hearts, but that's the birth of the love. And as time goes on, the more you put into love, the love will grow and get stronger. Now, one of the issues I found with this point is that sometimes young people, they will base their decisions regarding the person that they want to marry or the person that they're in love with based off of their infatuation with them. So they may overlook serious issues of incompatibility, for example. So you have a brother and sister who want to get married, and on the face value, like if you were to talk to them, if you didn't know that they were in love or whatever, you would say you two are never compatible. And most likely if they were to go speak to a sheikh or the imam or something like that, or they got some premarital counseling or something like that, it's very likely that the imam or someone would tell them, listen, you guys have a lot of issues that you need to work out before you actually enter into a relationship. So that's the first thing. SubhanAllah, I remember once a brother came up to me, a young brother, and he told me, he said, Sheikh, I'm in love with this girl, all this kind of stuff. And I said, okay, tell me about her. And I know this brother very well. So I was like, okay, tell me about her. And I was like, if you can tell me about her, I'll give you my advice on whether I think, inshallah ta'ala, the two of you will be compatible or not. And then he told me about her, and then I realized that she is very, very different than him. And he was actually a religious brother. She was completely not religious and all of that. And so I said, I told him, I said, listen, what's the deal here? Like, I know this is not like you. If I were to ask you, normally I would never imagine that you would marry someone like this. In terms of like your religiosity or whatever you want to call it, you guys are on very different levels. And then he tells me, he says, you know, Sheikh, I just felt like the first time I met her, you know, it just felt right. And I felt like this is the one. This is my soulmate. inshallah we'll talk about soulmates, inshallah. But he said, this is the one. And I said, okay, let me just ask you one question. I said, think about this question and then tell me what you feel about the decision that you're about to make. I said, inshallah ta'ala, this girl or this woman, she will, inshallah ta'ala, one day be the mother of your children. She's going to be the person raising your children, giving your children the tarbiyah and upbringing and all of that. Are you comfortable with this person raising your children? And do you foresee any issues? And then he thought about it for a while, and I told him, I said, go home, think about it, come back to me. And then he came back to me and he told me, he said, I don't see it. He said, I never thought that far ahead. And that's the problem with infatuation, that we get so blinded by this quote unquote love that people don't tend to think beyond the attraction that they have initially. If someone loves you, so they'll tell themselves, like, if this person really loves me, then they will change for me. So they'll tell themselves that, even though, once again, we may not be compatible, we may have a lot of issues, a lot of differences, but we love each other. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll make it work. And I know, like, there's things I don't like about her, but I will change her, inshallah. And out of her love for me, she will change. Or she may be telling herself, out of his love for me, it will change. And as they say, love conquers all, right? Have you guys heard that? Love conquers all. They say, you know what, we'll get through all of this because of our love. And subhanAllah, this is once again one of the main issues that I've seen, is that when people get over that infatuation stage, they realize that it's very, very hard to change someone else. And it's really that person who has to want to change themselves. And once you're no longer infatuated with the person, and it's no longer, you're past that honeymoon stage or whatever they call it, 5, 6 months, 4 months, 2 months, depending on who you ask, right? Once you're past that stage, it's very difficult. So I always tell young couples, I say, listen, this person, the way they are in front of you right now, the way you see them, marry them, keeping in mind or telling yourself that they're never going to change. And if you're happy with them the way they are right now, then go ahead and get married. But don't make the assumption or don't assume that they're going to change, or don't tell yourself that, yes, one day this person will change. That by getting married, you are completing yourself. And as they say, I'm looking for my other half when people are trying to get married. Or people say my better half, sometimes. But in the beginning of marriage, especially, people say my better half, right? The issue here is that when a person tells themselves and they say, I have issues right now, I don't feel whole, I have problems with myself, but once I get married, my spouse will complete me. And all the problems that I'm dealing with in life, or my problems with my iman and whatever else I'm dealing with, my spouse will make up for that. Because she has these strengths that I want for myself, and I may have some strengths, and we'll complete each other. And Islamically, subhanAllah, we don't depend on our spouse to complete us. Our spouse can help, but once again, we can't count on that, right? And it's also the issue of our relationship being whole with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or at least us striving to make our relationship whole with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and keeping that in mind before we get married, right? So, and the most important thing, subhanAllah, is actually our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And if your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fine, then your relationship will be helped by that. And a lot of times what happens, one of the other issues I've seen here, is that sometimes when you marry someone with the intention that they will complete me, or that they will make me better and all that, we tend to put our self-worth in their hands, right? We tend to tell ourselves that if my spouse, they're the ones who are going to make me feel better about myself, and they're the ones who are going to make me whole. And we forget that our self-worth is truly defined, at least according to Islam, our self-worth is defined by our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's an amazing, unbreakable thing, that when a person puts their self-worth in their piety or their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will be secure in their relationship. Because they don't have that need to have their spouse always tell them that you're amazing or you're perfect, which is all good, alhamdulillah, that's something that spouses should do. They should encourage one another and praise one another, but they don't rely on that single factor to make themselves feel whole or make themselves feel complete. But the Prophet ﷺ is teaching Zahir radiallahu ta'ala an here is that your value doesn't depend on your looks, on how people see you and whether they think you're a valuable person or not. He tells him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells Zahir radiallahu ta'ala an, he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finds you valuable. And here we see the Prophet ﷺ teaching the companions about self-worth, where their self-worth lies. And it's very important that before people jump into a relationship or get into a relationship, they understand that in the end of the day, their spouse may be happy with them, they may be upset at them, they may be proud of them, they may be disappointed with you, like your spouse may be disappointed at you, but your self-worth is directly tied to your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If by soulmate you mean that there's only one person out there who, once you meet them, you're going to know there's going to be butterflies in your stomach and everything's going to be amazing and they're going to be perfect and they're never going to say anything to upset you and they're always going to know when to bring you flowers and you'll be on the same wavelength at all the time, right? Whatever you're thinking, this person knows. If that's what you think a soulmate is, then yes, I'm telling you, you don't have a soulmate. However, if you mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for you to marry a certain individual, and you want to call that person your soulmate, alhamdulillah, no problem, go ahead and call that person your soulmate. Right? So now, the issue here is when we tell ourselves that there's only one person, and that person will be perfect, and there's going to be no issues and all of that, and I've had this happen to me as well. A sister came up to me, and she said, I'm having some issues with my husband, and we're having problems, and she said it wasn't like that in the beginning, but now, we're having all these issues, and then she says to me something which it hurt me very much. It was actually the first time I'd heard this. Now I've heard it many times. But it was the first time I heard this. And what the sister said to me, she said, I think I married the wrong person. And I said, why? And she said, because I don't think he's my soulmate. Right? And it's probably now the issues that they were having were not like major issues, like that are grounds for divorce or anything like that. Right? These were issues where she's like, yeah, I just don't feel that connection anymore. Right? Like it's just not there. Like my heart is just not there, and he doesn't know what I'm thinking, right? Like it just doesn't. So I think I married the wrong person. I need to go find my soulmate, right? That's misconception number 4. Now, seeking perfection is wallahi a big problem, and I've narrowed it down to 2 big issues with seeking perfection or looking for that perfect person, that soulmate or whatever. Number 1 is that person doesn't exist, as we said. There's no one who is perfect. So a brother or sister may spend their whole life trying to find that perfect person. And wallahi, you may think I'm exaggerating, but once again, I've seen this happen. That what's stopping a certain brother from getting married? This dude's like 35, getting on to 40, right? He's got a job, he can provide for his family, all that kind of stuff, but he's not married yet. Why? His mom brings him a new girl every weekend, right? Check her out. What do you think about her? He's like, yeah, I don't know, there's a couple issues here and there. Let's see what else you got, right? And this has started when the guy was like 25. 10 years later, he's still going through sisters, right? Every day someone else is like, yeah, I don't know if this person, you're never gonna find that person. There's no single person out there who is perfect. It's something I believe I mentioned in my earlier talk as well. No matter how big of a scholar someone is, no matter how big of an imam they are, no matter how popular they think they are, there's no individual on the face of the earth today who is perfect. This brother, may Allah protect him, he was the imam of a community for a long time. So he'd get a lot of phone calls, people would call him with issues and this and that. So one day he gets a phone call and it's his sister, and it wasn't odd because, like I said, he's the imam, people call him with their problems and all that. So he gets a call and he picks up the phone and it's his sister. She says, Assalamu alaikum. He says, wa alaikum assalam. And she goes, Sheikh, I'm in love with you. And this brother, mashallah, one thing I say about him is this guy's a boss, right? He's a boss. So you know what he says to her? He goes, sister, you're not in love with me. You're in love with your perception of me. You're in love with who you think I am. He says, if you only could talk to my wife, she would tell you. I'm not done with the story yet. He said, if you could only speak to my wife, she would tell you how I make her cry every single day. Right? Love is effortless. Or love is supposed to be effortless. That if you love someone and they love you, and if they're your soulmate and all, that love is not going to require any work. That you don't have to put anything into your relationship. You either love the person or you don't. And the reality of the matter is that the truth is that love always requires work. And that's love in your relationship, not only with your spouse, it's with anyone who you love, right? Even your parents, who you have that natural inborn love, you can increase that love, you can strengthen that love by being obedient to your parents, for example, right? Doing things for your parents, being kind and generous to your parents, or you can decrease that love by being disrespectful to your parents and things like that. Once again, another case study. Someone came to me, I was talking to this couple. They're having issues with one another, and one of the things that I came to realize is that they had very unrealistic expectations from each other. And then one of the problems was that the sister, when talking to her, I realized that her concept of love is very skewed, because she believes that her husband has to love her no matter what, right? Whether she's a good wife or not, what she does or not, it doesn't matter. This is your soulmate. The love will always be there, right? It does not depend on what you do for your spouse. And same thing happens on the guy's side as well. And especially, I would say especially on the guy's side, where a guy says, you're my wife, you have to love me no matter what, right? Or especially like if you believe you married your soulmate, that because you're my soulmate, this love will be there. It doesn't matter how we treat each other or what we do, that love cannot be broken. And once again, when people begin to see that their love doesn't have that same factor, and their spouse doesn't love them unconditionally, they may resort to saying something like, maybe you're not the right person for me. Maybe you're not my soulmate, or something like that. So people will get married and they don't understand some basic things that a person should know before they enter into a relationship. For example, just the simple fact or understanding that men and women are different. There are times when women react differently to situations and men react differently. There's nothing you can do to change the person. There's going to be the times when your spouse reacts in a certain way and you just cannot understand it. You have no choice but to accept it. You can bang your head on the wall, you can go crazy, you can pull your hair out, you can do whatever you want, but this is how she understands the situation, right? And so you just have to accept that at certain times. Like the understanding that there are certain differences between men and women. One of the things the scholars of the past, they would say, subhanAllah, is that, and I think this needs to be revived today as well. They would say that it is impermissible for a person to get married until they understand the rulings of marriage and divorce. The fiqh of marriage and divorce. At least the basic fiqh of marriage and divorce.
This is actually a really important conversation because, of course, when we push this idea that the halal outlet is nikah and then a kid hits like puberty, then problems begin, right? So how are they supposed to channel that energy and that enthusiasm into something that's legitimate? And of course, they just say, I need to get married, I need to get married. So you have like 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds coming up and saying, I want to get married, whatever. And they give the examples of Sahaba, you know, which is cool, but those same Sahaba that were teens were also generals of armies and they were doing things with their life. So let's take a break here for a second. And I mean, you're a general of an army, but you know, PS3 and like, you know, what is that video game again? Modern Warfare? That doesn't count. That's not the real military. But anyway, my suggestion to young men who are interested in getting married is I wouldn't put a barrier on your age. I wouldn't be one to do so. People mature differently. What I would argue is what are the standards of maturity? If you're able to provide for yourself, if you have a clear plan of action for your career, even if your parents are supporting you, you're disgusted by the idea because you're a man and you want to be able to live on your own terms. And instead of feeding off of your parents, you want to be contributing to your parents and making their life easier. And you have this like sense of responsibility that drives you. If that is not the case, and you're one of those Xbox 360, PS3 all-nighter, you know, every new movie comes out, Netflix and Hulu addict, whatever type, and then you say the Sharia says I can get married when I'm of the age, then you need to stop even bringing this up. And, because you don't even buy those video games, your mom buys them for you for Eid. So, first of all, yeah, I am really grumpy about this subject. Because what happens with these guys is they turn 25, 30 years old, and they're still not men. They're kids. They're not grown. And this is one of the things that Desi parents have done to their children. They've paid for everything, and you've kept them from turning into men. Get your kids a job, man. And yeah, honestly, make them work and make them pay their own college tuition. Make them work. Get them involved in the real world. It'll turn them into men.
Just one of the things I wanted to add to, I think Sheikh Umar Sulaiman mentioned about extended engagements, or extended, basically, where you get your nikah done, and then you wait for a long time before you get your walima done, basically consummate the marriage. One of the issues that I've come across is that I believe as well it's not a great idea. And one of the things that I've seen is that sometimes there's a couple, they get their nikah done and they get married, but they're not living together. And sometimes they live like far apart. So what do they do in the meantime? They're texting and they're talking on the phone and Skyping and all that kind of stuff. And eventually what happens is when you're talking every day for a long time, you run out of things to talk about, right? So basically you know everything about this person now. You know their favorite color, you know their favorite movie, and this, like, you've thought of every single question. You know that. So then you start discussing hypothetical issues, right? So you're like, okay, so inshallah one day when we have a kid, what do you want to name the kid? And then she'll say, well, if it's a boy, I want to name Muhammad, or if it's a boy, I want to name him Ahmed. And he's like, you know what, I don't like that name Ahmed because I knew this kid in high school and his name was Ahmed and he was a jerk. So I hate that name. And she's like, what are you talking about? It's my uncle's name and I love him. And now they start having issues with something which is hypothetical. And things like this can come up very often, and it may lead to arguments. And the problem is that in a situation like that, when you're not living with the person and you're not there, you're not in that relationship, it's harder to solve these issues. You see, when you're married and living with a person, these things are easier to get over because you have, put this in a PG terminology or PG way, you have an intimate physical relationship with this person. So at the end of the day, you all are going back to the same bed, for example. And these minor things, they don't matter. But when you don't have that close physical contact, these small things can end up becoming big things. And I've seen cases where they seem completely compatible, everything's great and all of that, but they started talking and they talked for a long time, and then they realize, oh, we have these issues or whatever, so once again, we're just not right for each other. When these issues are really not big issues.
I would argue, first of all, that a legitimate reason doesn't have to be religious. Let's not be so monolithic about life. Like, we don't do this in any other aspect of life, right? So, if a child or the proposing guy, I don't know if this is a guy or a girl asking this question, but if the other party, let's say it's a guy, he doesn't have a job, he doesn't have a degree, he doesn't have a plan for one, but he prays 5 times a day, and he's memorizing the Qur'an or whatever, right? So, and your parents say, well, he doesn't have any career. I mean, what are you going to do? Well, that's a legitimate concern. That's not an unfounded concern. And you can't turn around to your parents and say, well, you don't have a shari'i reason to turn this down because you're only looking at his status. Yeah, I'm looking at his status. He doesn't have a job. Where are you gonna live? But I love him. Love will feed us. Yeah, it'll feed you for like a week. You know? But so parents can have very legitimate concerns about this stuff. Parents can become very unreasonable. They do. We do need to have a very serious conversation with our parents about how the world has changed. But I will tell you, we are becoming insensitive to one side. In other words, we're concerned about the problems that the youth don't get their voices heard and they don't get their concerns met and they can't marry someone who they want. Their parents are too cultural or too backwards or too bigoted or this or that or the other. But you know what? We're not considering the parents' point of view. Our parents, they were raised and they were married on a different continent in most cases, with a completely different culture. And the United States, its own culture has changed in the last decade, not to mention the last half century. So they're living in a different planet. The standards they had for decency and appropriateness and socially acceptable things, especially when it comes to something as important as marriage, they were raised on certain standards. You can't humanly expect them to drop all of that and just, look at the world the way you do. It's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. It's going to take some real patience and time and discussion to be able to let go of some of those things that they hold so dear. And they may not be religious things. So what? There are things that are a part of a person's identity, is their culture or where they were brought up. That's a part of their identity. And it's very hard to let go of any part of your identity. You can't just say, where is this in the Quran and Sunnah, and therefore your concerns are not legitimate. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. Just as you're committed to your culture. We have a culture too. Don't delude yourself into thinking that we just follow Quran and Sunnah. You're following American culture. Where is it in the Quran and Sunnah that you eat pizza? From your diet to the way you dress to the expressions you use, you follow a culture, just as your parents did. And some things are normal to you in your culture, and some very different things were normal to them in theirs. So there is a barrier. There is a cultural barrier. You have to respect that barrier, and you have to work patiently with that barrier.